I would like to convene this evening's meeting of the St. Louis Park Telecommunications Advisory Commission for Wednesday, February 11th. And I'd also like to take a moment to welcome Maren Anderson, who is new on the commission. Welcome. Nice to have you with us tonight. First order of business, roll call. Reg.
Maren Anderson. Dale Hartman.
Here.
Cindy Hoffman.
Here.
Bruce Browning.
Here.
Rolf Peterson. Here. Andrew Reinhardt. Here.
Okay, next order of business, approval of the minutes from the last meeting. Anybody have any motions or questions or concerns? I have one question as I was looking through this, and maybe it's just, it was on item number 6A on the reverse page. They were talking about the cost of the packages, and it says Latino packages increase $5 a month. Service protection plan is increasing $1 a month, and then there's the sentence, they are downgrading to no charge with no in-home visit, formerly $2.99. Does that make sense?
Yes, in its own way it does, meaning that the double negative is confusing. Sorry about that, but that's probably how I said it. The meaning that there's no charge if you are downgrading a service and you don't have to have somebody from Comcast come to your home.
Okay.
So that's why it wound up being the no in-home visit next to the no charge in the same sentence. So that, in this case, the two negatives does not make a positive. There's still no charge for that particular downgrade.
And just a little further down, Reg, too, it's probably, maybe it's just me this evening. He asked about the services that were no longer available and if it was the entire list provided. Mr. Dunlap replied yes, a new customer couldn't ask for any of those services. Which services are we referring to there?
I don't specifically recall, but mainly the idea was that some of these services are not available to new customers.
Okay.
And I don't remember which packages we were referring to. I think that's more or less verbatim.
Okay. I was also curious, just for my own sake, we had talked about posting price increases on the city's website. Has that been done already?
I don't remember.
Okay. I can take that.
That certainly was our intent, and also when we get a final price list, or I should say a full price list for all of the 2015 services. As I mentioned at the last meeting, the letter we got was things that changed, that went up in price, and a few things that went down in price. But to put that up for the customer sometimes is misleading, because they would look for some services that aren't listed because the price didn't change for those.
Okay.
But I'll double check, and if it's not up there, it'll be up there in the next couple of days as we put up the packet for this meeting and some of the other items that need to go up.
That sounds good. Do I hear a motion for approval of the minutes? Okay, a motion to approve the minutes and a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Anybody opposed? Okay, motion carries. Next item, adoption of tonight's agenda. Any additions, any questions? If not, is there a motion to adopt the agenda as it is?
So moved.
Okay. A second?
Second.
Okay. Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Adoption of the agenda passes. Public comment is next on our agenda, and we don't have anybody in the audience this evening, so we'll move on to item number 6, which is reports and discussion, and specifically item A, franchise fee audit report and proposed settlement. Reg?
Mr. Chair, before we go on, I forgot to mention Toby Keeler might be here on the audio conference call. Toby, are you there?
Yes, I am. Right.
Excellent. In roll call, I forgot to announce that.
And I forgot to
so,
forgot to tell you again, too. Okay.
And as far as the feedback goes, I know this is a little bit awkward. We just had some feedback as we were trying to use the mics. I'd just say back off for a moment, give us a few seconds, and Scott can make a few changes in the control room, and then keep speaking so that we can be heard on the recording. So I know it's a little awkward, but in order to accommodate Toby, this is how we had to set it up. And then the second part of that is if we do any votes tonight, we need to do a roll call vote instead of, and so I forgot as you did the agenda, it just kind of was all coming back to me that because he's on a remote site, we need to go back and to make that a legal vote, I'll have to call the roll and have everyone say, tell me how they voted. So we'll have to do that for any other votes tonight, and I know that passing the agenda, we might as well get it right from the start. So let's go back to that vote and let the minutes reflect that we do a roll call vote. So we'll start with Maren on the motion to
Adopt.
approve the agenda, yes or no.
Yes.
And Dale. Do you follow me, Dale? I need you to tell me whether or not you approve that vote for the, to adopt the agenda. Yep. And then Cindy
Yes.
and Bruce
Yes.
and Rolf,
Yes.
Andrew,
Yes.
and Toby.
Approve.
Excellent. Okay, well, that'll be our format for all future votes. Sorry to mess it up the first time.
Thanks, Toby. Sorry about that.
All right, now let's go back to item 6A, that franchise fee audit report. I just have a couple of things to mention. The main thing is that it was a process that included Brian Swanson, the controller for the city. Toby and Bruce and myself were part of the audit selection committee, and then also when it came time for the audit report to be reviewed, Toby and Bruce assisted me, and Jamie Zwilling was involved as well, my supervisor. The draft report showed that Comcast offered to pay $6,225 to clear up any underpayments to the city over the 3-year period of time. They also pointed out that over that 3 years, they paid the city in franchise fees $1.8 million. So the percentage of underpayment was tiny, a fraction of 1%. It was 0.3 of 1%. And then, but our consultant who was doing the franchise fee review came up with a total and thought that it was still accurate, that it was somewhere between $10,700 and $12,700. So we had a conference and we basically decided that a settlement, would be better than spending $175 an hour for the consultant to continue to do additional review to try to prove exactly how much it was. So in the big picture now, this will be part of the franchise transfer approval process. And so later on tonight, you'll be talking about that pretty quickly. I just wanted to point out that the proposed franchise transfer settlement includes $8,000 as a settlement for the audit as a specific amount.
Just for reference this evening, do we know, and I think I asked you this a little bit earlier, Reg, do we know how many other communities have approved this so far?
Quite a few, the vast majority. I can kind of give you a laundry list starting kind of geographically. One of the first was the southwest suburbs, and those are the cities like Hopkins, Edina, Minnetonka, et cetera. And those folks went rather quickly. And then the northwest cable consortium, that's Plymouth and Brooklyn Park, Brooklyn Center, and those folks, they just renewed their franchise. So after 3 years of negotiating their franchise, that was part of their approval, was to approve the franchise that they came up with. Similarly, Bloomington did the same process, where they have approved it as well as part of 3 years' worth of negotiating their franchise. And Brian Grogan was the contract attorney for Bloomington, and I watched him as he gave his presentation. And the perception in Bloomington was that their new franchise was better than their old franchise. So they feel like that was a win-win. Minneapolis has passed it. St. Paul has not. The only big city that I know of that hasn't passed it is St. Paul, and they were getting close last I heard from their franchise representative, Mike Reardon. So overall, it's at least 2/3, if not 3/4, of the franchise authorities in the Twin Cities.
And this is, again, all of these transfers are predicated upon Comcast's acquisition of Time Warner, correct?
That's right. We're kind of getting ahead of ourselves, Bruce. I guess
Okay.
think I'd like to hear you wrap up the audit and see if that's clear, and then we'll jump
Okay.
into the next thing. I feel, pardon me.
No, that's quite all right. Is there any discussion about the audit report and the proposed settlement? Anybody in the commission? I'm sure you've read all 243 pages. It seemed pretty straightforward to me at this point. I concur with what Brian Grogan had to say, which is you could be doing this for a very long time and not gain anything from it, so it made sense to move the way that we have. Anybody else have any comments?
There is no motion that's required for the audit settlement.
Okay.
And it's rolled into the next item.
Okay. That being the case, let's move on to item B, which is the draft of the transfer resolution.
Tonight, the city staff is asking you to approve the Comcast franchise transfer with conditions. So we have a couple of things to talk about here. It's based on the advice from our attorney and what other communities are doing, as we referenced. It's contingent on approval by the federal agencies. There's always the chance that in 3-4 months that the federal agencies do not approve, and then all of this effort will have been would have been unnecessary, but we have to assume that it will go through. If the deal is approved, Comcast Minnesota Systems will be divested to Great Land Communications. We want to talk just a little bit about the impact on customers. The company name would change, and over time, some of the policies would change. Email addresses for those customers would change, which would be a bit of an inconvenience. And then the login credentials to check billing statements online or to check email remotely would change. The customers might have to reapply for direct bill pay. However, telephone numbers would not change. That's a good thing. And another thing that's a bit up in the air, frankly, is that the customer equipment to receive your cable channels, it wouldn't change right away. But eventually, Charter, which is the company that will be doing customer service if this goes through, your cable television packages would be called Spectrum. It would be a different series of cable channels. It might be a reorganization of the channel lineup, and ultimately there might be different equipment involved in order to get their services. But that's down the road.
Quick question. Any of this impact the broadband and the cable modem stuff at this point?
Not that I know of. I don't believe at all.
Strictly the television piece?
Just the television equipment.
Okay.
The MACTA financial review was a very long report that was in your packet, and the summary basically is that the consultants didn't feel comfortable with the amount of information that was provided by Comcast, Charter, and Great Land. And they went through, it was repeated many times in the report that they asked for certain specific kinds of financial projections or summaries or other information that wasn't provided. So the new company starts with no cash and may have more debt than the industry standard, which is 5 times EBITDA. And it's one of those industries actually that is fairly debt intensive because of the expense of building cable systems. So if you have more debt than most, it doesn't necessarily mean you're not going to be successful. However, another of their comments was that the company may have a difficult financial future, at least in the short term. And then the rest of that paragraph, to sum it up rather shortly, is that without having to consider raising rates or raising revenues or other finances in order to keep operating. So it's a negative report in that sense. And Brian Grogan, when he gave a background to the City Council and with several commissioners in attendance back in December, mentioned that the report possibly, that draft report at that point was not very favorable, but partially it was unfavorable because of the lack of full background information, and also because this is a very unusual circumstance to have a spin-off company in this fashion and then to contract the arrangement. Let me move on to the next slide. So the new company is going to be 1/3 owned by Charter and 2/3 by the Comcast shareholders, and yet it won't be controlled by Comcast. It'll be controlled by Charter management, essentially. Oh, excuse me, I misspoke. It will be controlled by Great Land Management. It's run by a separate board of directors from any of those other companies, and the Great Land executives have ties to the former Insight Communications, which was one of the large cable companies, the 9th largest in the country before they were purchased by Time Warner. All the local field operations and technical personnel, the people driving around in your Comcast trucks fixing things and making sure everything works, will be the Great Land employees. But a lot of the administration and most of the billing and collections and marketing and sales and administrative services will be provided by Charter personnel. And that also includes, as I said, the branding of the different video packages. Most franchise authorities in the Twin Cities have approved the deal, and the conditions usually relate to the public, educational, and government channels. The acronym is PEG, and those of you that attended the NATOA conference or any of these MACRA conferences, you've heard this phrase many times. Here in St. Louis Park, we refer to that as Park TV. That's our local channels, 14, 15, 16, 17, and 96. Several franchises actually have been negotiating for 3 years and don't have a new franchise figured out. I mentioned a couple that do. Well, North Suburban and Ramsey, Washington have been working very hard, and they don't have an agreement, but they got an extension to push that part down the road so they can go ahead and approve the transfer. So what are the St. Louis Park conditions? Well, the City Council and the Commission and city staff all along have been concerned about trying to find some way to protect customers in this transfer. So that's why our conditions include no price increase for customers because of the transfer, like the expense of all this or setting up the new company. Quarterly meetings for the new company representatives to address any subscriber issues for 2 years. Now, it just so happens that Kate Hensing is ill tonight. She would have been here. She's been our designated Comcast representative, so I don't fault them for that. But they do pledge to be coming to our quarterly meetings for 2 years. Continuation of an escalated complaint program, and those of you who have reviewed our complaint log over the years know how important that is to us. It's a huge thing. Quarterly reports to verify compliance with FCC customer service standards regarding answering calls, wait times, and hold times. And that's what we've been pressing for in this last 3-4 meetings as we've been looking for information from Comcast to verify that they are answering the phone quickly enough. And so this is a good step, and it was requested by the Commission to put that in the transfer conditions. One HD channel for Park TV later this year, and to add another 1 year later if requested. The audit resolution is identified as $8,000 for an underpayment of franchise fees and reimbursement for the transfer costs like the attorney's fees and that financial review. So in sum, this was the best package we could put together with our attorney representative, Brian Grogan, and staff and commissioners. And I sure thank in particular Toby and Bruce for helping quite a bit with this and their advice. And with that, I just want to mention that we know there's a lot of material in the packet about it, and I'd be happy to try to answer any questions that you have. We hope that you'll approve this tonight, and that will send it forward to the City Council meeting on next Tuesday, February 17th. Brian Grogan will be here that night to answer any questions that I can't well, actually, he'll answer all the questions that night. I wish he was here tonight, but we'll have to settle for me tonight. So with that, I'll open it to the Commission.
Anybody have any questions regarding any of the information tonight?
I guess I have a question, and I didn't read through all of the 300 pages on that packet. But so Charter Communications will be handling the customer service, is that correct? Do we have any idea of what their performance has been, the past performance of Charter Communications?
I don't have any good anecdotal information. However, there was a pledge from Keith Hall, who will be Greatland's new, the person in charge of customer service for them. And he said that actually he thought customers would be happy with Greatland because they won't have any offshore customer service call centers. Charter doesn't have any right now, and Charter has been hiring lots of people and doing plenty of training to try to build things up so that they can accommodate the additional calls they'll be getting.
I just had one question about the conditions we asked for. Do we know what conditions other communities asked for?
Yes, and to generalize, it would be the HD channels, and I think I forgot to mention the electronic program guide. And actually, both Cindy and Bruce attended the NATOA conference along with myself and John McHugh and Scott in control room there. And that was one of the things that they were harping on, that the electronic program guide is the way people watch TV these days. They're not necessarily surfing channels the way we did 20 years ago when there was only 15 channels. So it's important to get on the guide. So generally speaking, those are the two main things that every community is getting, and then there are things that are customized for each community. And our example, customization, is to push for the call records for the FCC approved. Some folks have already been getting those call center records from Comcast, so they didn't need to put that in the transfer request.
Toby, did you have something? I heard you mention something a moment ago.
Yes, I was just going to have a question for Reg. Reg, do you know if the government affairs people are going to be charter employees or will they be Great Land employees?
That's a good question. I'm not 100% sure of the answer, Toby, but I do know that as I spoke with Martin Ludden today, as he asked about this meeting tonight, the escalation group is definitely going to be retained, but in our description, as I mentioned, it says that the administration is going to be charter. So that's a gray area. I don't know the exact answer.
But most of the government affairs people from Comcast will be transferring over, as I understand.
That's my impression as well.
Okay, good. Thanks.
Any other questions or comments, anyone?
Reg, is it accurate to say that on page 3, the adding of a high-definition channel, that proposal by Comcast, which is in red, has changed slightly since this was printed? This says one will be eliminated.
Yes, you've got a draft there of something that you and I discussed last week. That wasn't provided to the commission, the full resolution.
Yeah.
I just have a comment. I spent the Christmas week out in Oregon with my parents, and my niece's boyfriend works for Charter out there in the Portland area. And he's absolutely dreading going to work for Comcast as part of this. He's going the other way. He absolutely loves Charter. I was really interested in hearing what he says, but you know, his support team is all local there. His calls come from people that are answering the phone locally and you know, things like that. And he just doesn't, he's so unsure of the future and everything. And, you know, and here we are kind of on the other side of that whole thing. But he does love his work. I mean, a guy who climbs telephone poles in the rain, but you know, yeah, it's kind of interesting just to hear that side of it. So, I think you did a good job. I mean, you know, this is just kind of unprecedented, isn't it? I mean, you know, you don't deal with this kind of stuff every day, so good work.
For anybody else that might be watching this, I'll always ask the question, what happens if we don't do this? Or what happens if we deny a transfer? We kind of know, but for people that might be watching this and taking this all in, what actually would happen?
I'd like Brian Grogan to answer that question,
Okay.
but since he's not here, I'll try to, as best I can, explain it the way he explained it to the city council when they asked that in December. And that is that you'd wind up in court, and who knows how expensive or how long that would take. And essentially, Comcast is going to be transferring in all these other communities, which means you'd be an orphan, you'd be the donut hole in the middle of the donut. And so they would basically have to carve us out and contract for all those services anyway. So I don't know if that would be more or less expensive than being part of the whole transfer to have Charter do the customer service and Greatland do the technical support. So there doesn't seem to be any real advantage to doing it that way, honestly. And if we were at this point, at the point where no other communities have made this decision to approve the transfer with conditions, that's when the biggest, you know, concern happens. But now that the overwhelming number of communities have gone that way, then it's a lot more certain to do something similar.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments, anyone?
So they would have to get a new box. Is that correct?
Well, certainly not immediately. And the one example specifically is the X1 boxes are the newest and the best that Comcast provides right now. And they use basically an interface with the web in order to offer many program guide choices. So that won't need to change immediately. But down the road, I don't know, 1 year, 2 years from now, things will have to shift. And those of you with a long memory in cable television might remember that at one point, Time Warner owned this system, and it was transferred to Comcast. And at a certain point, they do a little bit of channel realignment, where the sports channels may be grouped together differently in those other towns. And so, you know, come January 1st of some year, you may get a new channel lineup, and a bunch of channels are moved around, because then they will fit the charter assignments. So that's what I'm getting at. That probably will happen down the road a couple of years, and at a certain point, they may need to change the equipment. Now, it might not be the X1 box, but not all of us here have that have cable service. And if you have the DTAs, for example, maybe those will have to change. Those are the small boxes to provide service to your old analog TV. They now have HD DTAs, for example. Will those work forever with the charter system? Those are unknowns at this moment.
From the standpoint of changing email service, assuming this all goes through and everything flies the way we're looking at it right now, did they have a time frame on how long? I mean, would you be able to retain your old Comcast email address for X amount of time before there was actually a shift?
Yes, they're pretty generous about that. I believe it was 1 full year. Your old address would be supported, and the emails would be forwarded to your new address. And I think there might even have been an additional period of time after that, when your email, anyone sending an email to your old address might get something bounced back, but wouldn't necessarily forward to your new address. But it's a pretty generous term.
Curious too, do they, you may not know the answer to this, whether or not they might have an app for email, which Comcast presently has. It works fine on Android, I think, and iPhones. I'm just wondering whether the new company may have anything along that line as well. Do we know?
I don't know, but they would, I'm sure, have the ability to modify or to add some of those features during that transition period. Comcast is going to be heavily involved in this first year as it's transitioned over to the new company and the way that the customer service and technical stuff is done.
Thanks. Anything else, anyone? Awful quiet down there. We need to draft a proposal then for acceptance. Would somebody like to take a stab at that? Do I hear a motion?
Yeah, I think I'd like to make a motion that the St. Louis Park Telecommunications Advisory Commission supports the terms of the franchise transfer as presented, and probably about it. with conditions. With the conditions as that was part of the as presented, but with conditions, yeah. So,
Do I hear a second? Okay, any further discussion? In that case, we should do a roll call once again. All those in favor?
All right, let's start with Maren
Aye.
and Dale.
Aye.
Cindy.
Aye.
Bruce.
Yes, aye.
Rolf.
aye.
Andrew.
Aye.
Toby.
Aye.
Okay, motion carries. Thanks, everyone. All right, item C on tonight's reports and discussion, CenturyLink intent to franchise. I've had questions about this a little bit for you guys outside of this, but what can you tell us tonight? What's going on?
We had one really intensive meeting about CenturyLink's intent to come and get a video franchise for St. Louis Park. They're approaching other communities as well, and they're pushing very hard to get this done now. So the first step is what's called an intent to franchise. I've been in contact with our city attorney for this, Joel Jamnick, and so we'll be doing that in the next few weeks or next month. We've got to kind of work out the details because this is required by state law. And so you'll be hearing more about this later. But first, it was important to let you know that they're pushing to get into the video business. And I sent you the email today that if you would like to see a demonstration of their Prism TV service, they're doing that next week. And John's going to go one day, and I'm going to go another. And so you are welcome to visit as well. So take a look at that and see if you might be able to see the demonstration. I believe it was a little over an hour, and it was in northeast Minneapolis to see the demonstration.
Now, for them to enter the city, they have to live up to the same agreements that Comcast has had to live up to in their franchise agreements. The difference, as I understand it, and correct me if I'm wrong, is their intent to put fiber to the home throughout the city?
No, that's not their intent, as stated. They are pushing forward now with their 1 gig service to certain areas, and parts of St. Louis Park will be positively affected by that. And so you would have another option for high-speed internet that would be the 1 gig service for a different price point than what they're charging for their 40 meg service, for example. The video service would be different, and they need a video franchise in order to offer that. They don't need to do anything different legally in order to offer their 1 gig service with the city. But they do need to have a franchise. And as you point out, state law requires that the franchise for the new entrant of the video service to the market needs to be no more burdensome than what the existing cable television company faces.
The fiber to the home piece, which I certainly have interest in, it's probably too early to know yet what areas of the city might be eligible for that at this point.
Yeah, that's right. They kind of showed us a map about their 1 gig service, and that I don't believe is fiber all the way to the home anyway. I think that's a fiber to a neighborhood, and then they use the existing phone line for the last, few hundred feet or 500 feet or whatever they can technically do.
And they can get a gigabit of service on a phone line?
That's my understanding.
It's gotta be close to your house.
Okay.
Last November, they were working our neighborhood really hard on selling the 1 gig. My wife told them to go away and not come back. Unfortunately, I would have loved to talk to them about it tonight, but I haven't yet.
I've asked the question, if you go on their website and you look, and you type in 55416, which is my zip code, 40 is all that they're offering at this point in time, but they're enticing you with what they have on their website, suggesting that maybe it become available at some point, but nobody knows when that some point might be.
My neighbor across the street did express interest, got the guy's card, and has returned his call, but it hasn't come back. So I don't know. I think what they did 3 months ago was really just seeing what interest was out there, but he has not heard back from him. But he said the price was less than he would be paying right now for broadband at the 1 gig for at least the introductory period. So he was interested.
Any other comments, questions about CenturyLink at this point? At some point, I would like to see them come and address us when we get a little further on down the line with the process. Maybe we can extend an invitation to them for that purpose.
Reg sent everybody an email with a link to be able to make a reservation for their Prism TV demo. They have a total of 11 sessions on Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday.
Will they have some on Monday as well?
There's 2 sessions on Monday, and then there's 5 sessions on Tuesday and 4 sessions on Wednesday. I'm going to the 8:30 session on Tuesday. So that's 15 people per session. That's a total of 165 slots. And when I registered for that, they automatically registered with me with a reservation software application called Doodle, and so I'm constantly getting these emails from Doodle saying that this person from Roseville has signed up for the demo, and so I would say that at least 30 people have sent me a Doodle or something. If anyone is available Monday, Tuesday, or Wednesday, they only go into the mid-afternoon as far as. It's at 600 Stinson Boulevard in Northeast.
That link you sent me, then if I go to that, I can take a look at Monday as a possibility.
Yeah, should work, yeah.
Okay.
Monday, they only have afternoon
Okay,
2 afternoon appointments. It's an hour, 15 minutes.
okay. Has everybody had access to that link, or did John send it to everybody at this point? Okay. Any other questions about that particular area? We can move ahead to item D, Federal Communications Commission update on key issues.
Well, there's two very big ones right now, and they're interrelated, and net neutrality is one of them. And the other was the announcement by the FCC chair that he was going to recommend that the FCC use the Title II regulation for internet service henceforth. And the even bigger part of that announcement was that that regulation would apply then to mobile phone internet service. So I'll be able to send you some pretty good summaries of what that means, but the gist of it is that Title II means essentially you're more like a common carrier, more like what the phone system was like. If you go back a few years, you had your local service telephone line, and then you had a multitude of long-distance providers available. And so that's the regulatory scheme that was in place at that time. The network itself was opened up for other providers to use, and it had certain restrictions and regulations that were needed in order to be able to have their service sold this way. And so the internet itself, as for internet service providers, the last 5 or 10 years since it was declared an information service by the FCC, has meant that it's quite deregulated. There really are relatively few restrictions, and that's where the net neutrality issue raised its head, as at a certain point Comcast was involved with throttling back the service for some folks that were using BitTorrent, and it became a huge deal that they were blocking access for that. And then, of course, the controversy in the last year or so about Netflix being concerned that Comcast was providing slow service, and then eventually involved themselves in a business agreement with Comcast so that they wouldn't have to worry about their customers having slow service for their Netflix downloads. So the final vote on that is going to be February 26th, and typically there's a couple of weeks worth of before that where they actually put the regulations out there. So we should be seeing some articles soon about what specifically the chairman, Wheeler, is proposing for these regulations. So that's a huge deal. It's been in the works now for a while that we've been hearing about net neutrality. So it will be very interesting to see what that means. And his whole goal, which is a very laudable goal, is to keep the internet as open as possible for innovation, and yet to protect the businesses that want to use it and go through these services. He gives the example of back when he was working with a startup company a number of years ago, providing an internet service that was roughly 1.2 megabit in speed, which is slow by today's standards, but was pretty fast 15 years ago. And yet AOL crushed them in competition through their dial-up because they had access to telephone lines, and the company that Chairman Wheeler was working for had access only to cable TV lines, which were not doing much in the way of internet service at that time. So in that case, he wants to see all of the internet still be the kind of thing where there's access for everybody, and that's his goal, and it's very difficult to write these rules. Any of you who have ever read just how to play a particular card game that you've never, or board game that you've never played before, you look at the rules and regulations, then you can eventually usually boil it down so you can understand it. But writing rules and regulations is not easy, so I'll be very interested to see what they come up with.
Questions, anybody? Comments? The MACTA convention we went to, where the FCC chairman was one of the guest speakers, he's quite an amazing guy. I hope he can push this through. I guess we'll see. But I think it's a good idea, from my perspective anyway. Anything else, anybody? On to item E, Park TV programming report for last year, 2014. I'll take a brief moment to say you guys do a spectacular job, not just because you work for the city, but because you do. There's a lot of stuff going on, and I think that's great.
One thing I wanted to add to this, and we haven't completely compiled it, is how many programs were produced last year by the Park TV staff, and how many hours of programming that is. it's a number we like to come up with and be able to put in the city budget. It's not real easy to find because there's a lot of overlap with programs that run on more than one channel. Or the report that you got, it does show, though, it gives you a very clear idea of the variety of programming that runs on the different channels and then who's producing them. And as an example, right now, Channel 17 is the channel that I'm responsible for programming, but Scott Smith's back there directing this meeting, and he covers Planning Commission, and Paul Broden covers the City Council meetings. So I do a slim amount of programming that's available, that's seen on this channel. But there's still a lot of variety of things to look at, but this is more or less the government channel, the city meeting channel, and then you've got Channel 14 and Channel 16, which has a tremendous amount of high school sports and concerts and other stuff. Just part of it was to give you some background on that, and so you can see what's on the channels.
Just so people know too, if you don't have conventional cable TV service, can you see this other places?
Yes, we stream all our channels at parktv.org, and so that's where there's a couple icons for Channel 14, 15, 16, and 17, and 96. So you can click on the logo for those channels and then watch those channels. And they stream at a pretty high resolution of 800 kilobits per second. So even a hockey game is pretty good to watch at that speed on a pretty good sized computer screen.
I have a program list of programs that played in 2014 and what's been produced so far in 2015 that I'll pass down for
That'd be great.
copies for each of you.
Thank you. Comments, anybody, or shall we move ahead? Okay. We can move ahead to Part F, complaints. Complaint log was kind of sparse this time around. I missed, for whatever reason, mine did not print, so I didn't get a chance to look at it. Most of what I see is kind of similar to what I've seen in the past. It sounds like most of these have basically been ironed out all right through help from Reg and the city a little bit.
There were 5 complaints so far in almost 6 weeks so far this year, so that's a pretty good clip. Last year there were over 100 complaints, so that's an average of 2 per week. So we're off to a slow start for complaints, and that's a great thing.
I would agree. We'll see how the year progresses. Any other comments? Specific to complaint logs, anyway.
I just have a question about the one where the lady had something repaired and then like a couple of days later somebody else came from Comcast and there wasn't any record of the, I was reading through it and I'm just trying to find it here.
Number 6, the last one. I
Okay,
did
I just
receive
got
a
to it.
comment back. The customer is still dissatisfied. Essentially, Comcast said that the second technician didn't know that the first one had been there. And they were both, in fact, Comcast technicians. But the customer was still unhappy with the way it was handled. And I haven't called back to see if there's anything further that the person wants, that the customer wants to do with that. It was an unusual circumstance.
Anything else, anyone? Okay. Item number 7, as we move ahead, communications from the chair or any of our commissioners or city staff. I have nothing this evening specifically. Anybody else? Other than hi?
I'd like to promote our blood drive happening on Friday the 13th this week. In the morning, there's plenty of slots in the mid-morning from 9 o'clock to 10:30. So if you find yourself available to do so or can recommend it to a friend, that'd be great. We have 23 slots we need to fill, and we're just over half right now.
Is there a reason you did Friday the 13th?
The blood bank picked that, not me.
Okay. Anything else, anyone? If that's the case, I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved, Toby.
Second.
Do we need to take a roll call on this one?
As a matter of fact, we don't.
Okay,
You can
And-
declare the meeting adjourned.
the meeting is adjourned. Thank you, everyone.